It's
The
unusual to
pain.
walk
Yeah.
into the pain. It's
Mhm.
Yeah.
more common to pull away from it because you think about pain in
Mhm.
general. If you go to touch a stove, right? If you touch a hot stove, you don't go, "Oh, I'm gonna leave my hand there longer," right? It's the normal reaction is you pull it away because it
Mhm.
hurt, because it's pain, and we do the same thing with other things in life. When there's pain, we pull away.
Mhm.
But then we have to have the wisdom to recognize, when is that pain necessary? Because not every pain is necessary for us to walk through, but there's many that it is necessary and good for us to walk through. Because if we don't, we can get stuck in it.
Yeah. Well, and so much of our emotional things are related to our body, and that's
Mhm.
what I learned in mine was that all that stuff goes somewhere.
It
You
Yeah.
does.
don't it doesn't just go away. It just doesn't. And God
Yeah.
wants us to deal
Yeah.
to face it. And with him we can, but
Mhm.
And if
Yeah.
you
yeah.
don't deal with it, it will
Mhm.
deal with you.
It,
Oh, really
that's
good.
exactly right. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So I'm excited to have you guys here today with us talking about the topic of grief and loss. I know it isn't a topic we delve into too often as a culture, but I think it'll be a good conversation for us to have, especially this time of year. When we think about February, I don't know about you guys, but I often think of, we think about Valentine's Day and getting together with those that we love and care about. But it also, on the same thread of that, if you've been through some grief or loss, it can bring up some memories that can be difficult. So when you guys think about the month of February, what are some of the thoughts that maybe resonate with you?
I definitely initially think about Valentine's Day and just kind of all the lovey-dovey things that are
Mhm.
around, especially
Yeah.
around like grocery stores or the mall or wherever. And just working with the women that we do, it's made me start to think about it a little bit differently.
Mm,
And I think about like the people who don't have that anymore, especially with like we have a Young Widows Club here, and I think about that with them in
mhm.
particular, like their grief
Mhm.
that they probably experience this
Yeah.
time of year.
Yeah.
Oh,
It can be a lot.
definitely.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good one to bring up is the physical loss of someone that we live with and that we have relationship with. It can be challenging, especially during time when everybody around us is celebrating and remembering. We can almost feel left out or disconnected.
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just generally a cold, darker month. There's not a lot
Mm-hmm.
of sun, and I'm one of those people
Yeah.
that I love sun.
Yeah.
And so I think you can also start, feeling down in the
Mm,
in the dumps a little bit, and
that's
it's just a
true.
reminder of it's okay, we're gonna get through winter. It's kind of the
Yeah.
tail end of winter.
Yeah.
Um, I remember when my kids were little, I dreaded February because of just sickness
Yeah.
and illness. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's kind of more of what I
Yeah. I mean,
go
that's
to. And there are a lot of people that are ill right now. It just
yeah.
seems like a month where all the germs
It's
Yeah.
true. I know, like,
and it's
there's
cold.
a lot of
So
schools right now that are struggling with a lot of illnesses and
mhm,
just a lot of people being sick. And like you said, it can be depending on how the year is, what the weather's like. It can be very dark and very gloomy
mhm.
in February. So that kind of compounds a lot of things many people are feeling.
Yeah, especially with the anxiety and depression
Hmm.
and things going on,
Yeah.
even more than usual in
Yeah,
the
for
culture.
sure.
So
Yeah. So there is a lot of pressure to kind of, I think, I don't know, almost put a front on. Like, everything's fine. I'm good. And we don't really want to talk about the things that we struggle with. And it can be a challenge, especially when we think about loss. We've kind of alluded to some of these already, that when we think about loss, a lot of times when people think about grief and loss, the first thing that we go to is the death of a loved one.
yeah.
But there's so many things we call either perceived or real loss. So the real loss would be those things that we experience, like the death of a loved one. But the perceived can be the things that we might um, expectations. They could be maybe, oh, maybe you had hoped one day you would get like a certain level of education or credentialing, but maybe that never came to
Mhm.
fruition for you. And so that could be one of those perceived losses. Or maybe you had an expectation of relationship with a certain person. and that relationship either is broken or you never got to have it because of various reasons. And so there's a lot of those. When you guys think about perceived loss, ugh. When you think about perceived loss specifically, is there a type of loss that comes up for either of you?
Well, I think of just mentioning my kids and when they were little.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a very busy season now. We're high school, middle schooler, and
Yep.
elementary. And I find myself now grieving a little bit the loss of just their child, their
Yeah.
little childhood, and all of a sudden realizing like that's over for me.
Yep.
Now there's parts I don't mind, like the
Right.
February illness and things like that. I definitely don't miss, but
Right.
just looking back and looking at pictures makes me,
Mm-hmm.
grieve a little bit that
For
that part of
sure.
my life is over.
Yeah.
And I love this part too, but
Right.
it's
But there
just
is a
realizing that, yeah,
mm-hmm.
like I'm not one of the young moms anymore.
Yeah. Right. You're not one of the young moms. You don't have
No.
those, you don't get to do the young mom things or the things
Mhm.
that you get to do when the kids are little, all the little crafts, all the fun
Yeah.
stuff you could do when they're
Yeah.
little. Sit down and build a little fort.
Mhm.
Your teenagers probably don't want to build a tent fort and crawl around under the
Mm,
table.
no.
No, they just don't, right? It just
I know.
changes.
Yeah. So getting rid of all those kind of things that they played
Mhm.
with before, and
It's so
kind of freeing, but it's kind of sad all in the
mhm.
all
Yeah.
so I think leaving a season and entering a new one is
Yeah.
always gonna bring up a little bit of grief, I guess,
Oh,
just that you don't expect
yeah.
until
Yeah.
you sit back and realize that's
100%.
past, and yeah.
Yeah. I kind of think about that because I'm an empty nester for the most part at this stage. And I thought, and when my kids were getting to that
Oh,
point of
yeah. I know,
growing
I'm
up
not
and
looking
moving
forward to that.
on, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I mean, it was such a transition for my husband and I just to
Oh, I
figure out
bet.
what's our daily rhythm like now? How do
Mhm.
we do the things and just little things like going grocery shopping changed and
Oh,
cooking
yeah.
dinner, because I had a
Mhm.
family of 5 and then it became just the 2 of us. And it was like, how do I do that?
Mhm.
And so there's a loss that comes in with that, and sometimes we want to, I think, brush those aside and be like, this is just life. But I think it's good and it's biblical for us to stop and one recognize what God has given us, but also to take time to grieve through that and say, God, this is where I'm at. This is really hard. And
Mhm.
while I'm grateful for what you've given me, I am grieving what I have to let go of. Because
Mhm.
in that space, we're learning to trust Him with what's to come.
Mhm.
And that's so important.
Yeah. That's something that I was thinking as you both were talking because I haven't experienced either one of those
Yeah.
stages at this point, but just thinking how like bittersweet it must be to
Hmm.
be in those stages and think back to what you did with your kids, and then also while you're in the season you're in to think, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you think this, but that you guys did like a job well done, and
Mm.
like seeing your kids grow and like move on in the world. It's like
Hmm.
I helped them along accomplish that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think sometimes we can all have the thoughts of a job well done, but I think there's other days as moms or parents, we might fall back into gosh, I wonder if, I
Right.
wonder if.
Or I could have done this
Yeah.
differently, or
Yeah.
I mean, that's all of
Yeah.
us
I think we all do
when we
that, right?
reflect
Yeah.
back on things.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So as we've kind of talked about some of those perceived losses, when we think about what are some of the other losses we might if we could list some, why don't either Laura or Taylor, if you two want to think of some different losses that you either personally experienced or watched other people go through? What are some of those that you've seen in your own walk of life?
So one that comes up for me, I don't know how to put it into words
Hmm.
exactly, like what the particular type of loss is. I guess loss of like a community of people.
Mm.
Mhm.
When I had to move,
Yeah.
like pretty,
Yeah.
um, not it wasn't like super unexpected, but it was still hard. I mean, like we had about a year to think about it,
Hmm.
and we lost all the community we had at that time, and that was hard because we had to build that back up, and thankfully we have, but it was hard at that time.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, that would be really hard because we rely so much on our community to support us. And then when it's taken away, it can really shatter a lot of our mm, what might feel our stability.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
Mm.
mm, yeah. It can be challenging because then now you're going into a new environment and trying to build a new community. So not only you're processing through that loss, but now you are trying to find that new community. So there's a lot of feelings that can come up with a lot of emotions. And it's important for us to recognize again how that affects us. Because if we just try to carry on, pretend like it didn't affect us, it can be,
Yeah, it can be really challenging.
mm-hmm, for sure. Yeah.
Did
I
you
don't
want a
know.
long list
I
or
mean, I don't know. I mean,
or one thing?
or whatever you want to
Um,
give. Can you think of some things that have,
yeah, and I was I was thinking about this conversation, just the different things that I've felt lost. I mean, when I
mm,
was in college, my younger brother's best friend was killed his senior year in
mm,
a car accident. So
yeah.
that was the first major unexpected loss, I feel like, in our family at that time. And
Mm-hmm.
it was just really hard to watch my brother,
Yeah.
I mean, he was like a little brother to me as well. Just to have him suddenly gone at this
Mm-hmm.
pinnacle of his high school,
Yeah.
it's just his little life, I guess.
Right.
And so that was hard, to process. And it's really affected my brother even now,
Yeah.
into his early 40s. So
Mhm.
um I can think of just relationship loss, especially
Mhm.
after, the pandemic and all that stuff. And people got
Oh,
very opinionated in the political scene. And
yeah.
it just I think it happened to every single person. Family
Mhm.
gatherings became uncomfortable, awkward,
Different.
different. It's just hard to
Mhm.
relate to one another
Yeah.
because of all that. And it's really tragic to me
Yeah.
that we've let things like that become more important than
Mhm.
relationships. So I've definitely, with, family and friends, gone through that,
Mm.
learning how to navigate that, grieving that.
Yeah.
Um, of course, I had two miscarriages. That was hard,
Mhm.
grieving
And that's one of those
those two
losses that people don't
things.
talk about very much.
No. And yeah, I didn't know how to grieve. That was before I
Mhm.
realized that grieving, the Lord actually taught me a lot of
Mhm.
of things through that. The first one was before I had any children, so I was just like, all right, well, that stinks. Let's move on. So that one didn't
Yeah.
impact me as much, although it was disappointing,
Mhm.
not something I was expecting, like moving,
Right.
and the
Yeah.
the loneliness that actually it's exciting to move. And then I've been through that too, the loneliness of I don't
Mhm.
really know anybody. I have to reestablish my entire,
Yeah.
my people. But yeah, but the second one was way more uh, just hard to deal with because I already had a child.
Mhm.
And I wasn't expecting that because
Mm.
I had a deepening relationship with the Lord at that time. I was really on fire and growing. So it was
Mm.
hard for me to wrestle through all that. Like, God, why would you do this to me? I'm
Right.
doing everything you want me to do. And why
Oh,
would you allow this to happen? So then I had
why?
to
Yeah.
deal with the grief of that God doesn't promise that everything's going to work out
Mm.
perfectly. Even
That's
if you do everything right, that we
yeah.
still live in a sinful world, and
Yep.
there's just everybody's going to go through
Yeah.
a
That's hard.
hardship. I mean,
Yeah.
I used to we had a group that met in our home, like a small group, and I used to say, you know what? It's better to suffer with Jesus than without him, because
Mhm.
everyone on this planet is going to endure some
That's
suffering.
right.
So anyway, I had to really learn that. And then also grieving. So because of that relationship that was growing, that was so good with the Lord, but at the same time, I just had immature thinking. So I thought, it's okay. Okay, Lord, you want me to accept this as your plan for me?
Yeah.
I'm good. That this is good. It's fine. I'll just continue to seek you and pray. I was just doing what
Mhm.
I thought was,
What you should, yeah.
the way that
You,
he would want
yeah.
me to
Mhm.
receive this plate that I had been dealt.
Yeah.
Um, but I started having weird body issues going on.
Mm.
Like it was almost like thyroid stuff, and I was
Mhm.
fatigued, and I just had weird things going on in my body. And so I went to the doctor, and
Yeah.
they did all these tests. And like, well, we really don't see anything specific. And I just felt the Lord in my quiet time one morning say, you need to grieve. It's
Yeah.
okay to
Yeah. Because our bodies
to
respond.
come to
Yeah.
me and grieve. And I
Mhm.
mean, it really made a quick my body got back in alignment once I just cried it
Mhm.
out and got mad at God and,
Yeah. Yeah.
questioned what he was doing, but that at the same
Yeah.
time releasing that.
Yeah.
So grief and walking through the steps and just
Yeah.
allowing that to happen. That was a
Yeah.
huge thing. That was
There's
a
so many good things in there.
Yeah.
that was
I
really
mean,
important.
because
I really try
we
and
do have
encourage
to
people to
grieve.
grieve.
Yeah,
Yes,
we
you
have
have
to
to.
because our bodies
Mhm.
will respond to it. And if we don't grieve and we don't process through it, our bodies are going to tell us like something's not
Oh,
right.
it does. That was a real wake up call for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that grieving is biblical. Like,
Yeah.
God's given it to us for
Yeah.
that reason to wrestle with Him.
There's a
And He's
whole
big
sec
enough to
there's a whole
handle
section
that.
of the Bible
Yeah.
about lamenting, right? I think it's called
Yes.
Lamentations, right? And so we learn about lamenting in the Bible and how we can process through that and just how we can, like you even mentioned, like I was angry with him. I was angry with
hmm
God for what he let me go through. And
Yes.
you had to wrestle through that. And that is
hmm
part of the grief process often. And sometimes, especially sometimes in the Christian realm, we don't talk about it being okay to
Yeah.
wrestle with the Lord and wrestle with our anger with him, our
hmm
disappointment.
hmm
He already knows those things. He already knows that's not how we expect it to be. And we need to have space to do that. As you guys
hmm
were kind of sharing the things that you walked through, the memory that popped up for me is when I was sharing with Taylor earlier this week was that when my kids were little, we went through the loss of our home.
mm
And so my husband had had a couple of job losses and we were in a point to where we couldn't provide. And it was a
Yeah.
really hard
I bet.
time. And so we lost everything we owned. And the only thing we walked away from with that is our van, and that was it. And the things, obviously the things we packed from our house, but that was a
Yeah.
really hard time and talk
I
about a lot of
bet.
emotions and a lot of things to try to
Mhm.
grapple with. And the way that people responded wasn't always kind.
Mhm.
And having to work because that also complicates the grief now because it's not just the grief for the loss of my home. It's the not being able to provide for my kids. It's the things that make people how people now responded to me because I'm one of those people.
Mhm.
Or I had or, you are, you're you're the people who are in that situation.
Mhm.
And so there was a shift in the way I was treated or people
Wow.
interacted with me,
Yeah.
and that was really hard too, so I had to grieve
Mhm.
some of that, and then on top of that, I was in a totally different community, a totally different town, and so we moved, an
Mhm.
hour away from where we were at, and so there was just a lot of change and all that, so it was so much loss that came in that season, but, there's a lot that we all kind of walk through from that loss standpoint, and when that happens, when there's a loss in the family or with an individual in a family, because we're all in a family dynamic, whether we're married or unmarried, we have siblings, we have parents.
Mhm.
Rarely is that loss only affect the one person.
Yeah. Yeah. That was so not just the one person, but something I was thinking about as both of you were talking and just thinking about my own loss, but that every loss kind of has layers to it. It's not
Mhm.
Yeah.
just that one thing like losing your home, losing having a miscarriage and those things like there were so many other things underneath there that you lost in that
Mhm.
process. And then yeah, that of course affected other people as you grieve yourself and
Mhm.
um I don't know, I thought about that like cuz that makes it so much harder because you're trying to deal with it but then you're like, well now I have to deal with this over here because it affected
Mhm.
this and just it makes it more complicated.
Mhm.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was also thinking about the clients that we serve because often their grief and loss that they're walking through is complicated by other situations or experiences that they are currently having or have had. So if you have had, some type of grief or loss, and say you're also in an abusive situation, that's
Such an added layer.
it's such an added layer because that abuse often has layers of complication to it as well. And so I think the thing we're both trying to express is that, or all three of us really, is that it's not easy. It's not simple.
Mhm.
Mm-mm.
It's not just this thing happened, and if I just try hard enough, do better, I can pull myself forward and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
I think it's part of our American culture, you know.
For
We
sure.
just we want
Yeah.
to drive through grief session. Okay.
That'd be nice.
Drive
I
through
will
grief
have
session.
That would be so
I will
great.
have an order of grieving. Thank you.
Uh,
I'll take that. I'm done. You know, I
Grieving
think
with
we
a
all just
side
want to
of
get
tears, and
over.
then we're
Yeah.
done. Yeah.
I think that's just how we all think. Like,
Yeah.
let's, you know, get this over with,
I did
move
it.
on,
Yep, I
get
did it
to the next
once.
thing.
It's
The
good.
instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's difficult to stay in the pain.
Yes. And I think a lot of people just want to
Mm-hmm.
avoid that. I mean, we
Yeah.
all
Oh,
kind of have
yeah.
that
I think
human
we all, I think that,
tendency to
oh, for
not want to,
sure.
but especially I think
Yeah.
nowadays we all
Yeah.
just want to
We
run
do.
away
Mm-hmm.
or just not
Yeah.
address
It's
the
unusual to
pain.
walk
Yeah.
into the pain. It's
Mhm.
Yeah.
more common to pull away from it because you think about pain in
Mhm.
general. If you go to touch a stove, right? If you touch a hot stove, you don't go, oh, I'm going to leave my hand there longer, right? It's the normal reaction is you pull it away because it
Mhm.
hurt, because it's pain. And we do the same thing with other things in life. When there's pain, we pull away.
Mhm.
But then we have to have the wisdom to recognize, when is that pain necessary? Because not every pain is necessary for us to walk through, but there's many that it is necessary and good for us to walk through. Because if we don't, we can get stuck in it.
Yeah. Well, and you know, so much of our emotional things are related to our body, and that's
Hmm.
what I learned in mine was that all that stuff goes somewhere.
It
You
Yeah.
does.
don't it doesn't just go away. It just doesn't. And God
Yeah.
wants us to deal
Yeah.
to face it. And with him we can, but
Hmm.
And if
Yeah.
you
yeah.
don't deal with it, it will
Mm.
deal with you.
It,
Oh,
that's
really
that's
good.
exactly right. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hi, I wanted to interrupt this episode to share a little bit with you about Peace Restored. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Peace Restored is a non for profit, and we rely on support from people just like you. Did you know that if you donate as little as $2 a month, it could provide curriculum for a woman that we provide mental health care to? Or $4 a month would help us provide mental health care for a woman just like yourself or someone that you care about. So if you would consider supporting us in our mission, please go to our website at peacerestored.net. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. We say that a lot here. If you don't deal with your stuff will deal with you.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's so true, and especially in the grief and loss area, but it could be that way with any of the things that we try to walk through on our own. And I think that's the other thing to remember, is that we don't have to do it alone.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that sometimes when the grief and loss becomes so unbearable, it's because we try to do it as our own, in our own abilities, without community. There's almost, I think, I don't know what you guys think about this, but sometimes I feel like there is a shame component attached to grief and loss. Like, I should be over it. This shouldn't be that big of a deal. Uh, do I really need to tell people that I'm still
Yeah.
struggling? I mean, it's been a week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think about that just when I think about our clients and what we do here, like, because there's so many of the things we work with, like, with the women have experienced in their childhood. And that's something I think that
Mm-hmm.
comes up for them is I should be over this by now. This was
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago
Yes.
or so, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not true.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because if it's something that happened in their childhood, often the loss that they have, that they need to identify, is sometimes they have a loss of innocence,
Yeah.
a loss of their childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that processing through that. But then now I'm a grown woman. Why do I need to process through something I lost when I was younger? It's so many years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. So when we think about these things, we also, I think the other side is, as what are some ways that we can maybe help somebody we know that is going through a grief or loss? How can we help them process through, or how can we be there for them? So what are some good ways that we can come along those that are grieving?
I feel like something that has I'd never heard this term before, honestly, until pretty recently, but because someone here was talking about it, but the ministry of presence.
Mhm.
And then I realized there are many people in my life who just have that gift. And because that's something I didn't understand, because
Yeah.
sometimes they'd be like, I just need to be there. Like if someone,
Mhm.
like a friend was at the hospital, or like, I'm like, but you can't, there's nothing you can do. But that's what they were doing. They were being that ministry of presence. And
Yeah.
I think that's so significant. It's such a big deal because you don't know what to
Mhm.
say, and you don't have to know what to say. Just
Mhm.
be present.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's
That's
such a
really, really
yeah,
good.
it is.
Yeah, I think that's just checking in and
Mhm.
telling them that it's okay to not be okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. We don't have to have the right words to say.
Yeah. And I
Eh,
think that's what keeps people away. I mean, I've felt that way before with
mhm.
somebody, grieving a really hard loss of a close family member or friend. It's like, do I reach out to them? Do I not reach out to them?
Mhm.
Um, is it going to be too painful to bring it up or should I bring it up, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
But
think that's the important I think that's a good thing to remember, kind of going back to what Taylor was saying, is that when
Hmm.
we think about the ministry of presence, it is literally that, just being present.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's better to not speak and just be present than to try to find the right words. And so
Hmm.
sometimes I mean, I think that gives us freedom in that space with those who are walking through grief, to say, sometimes you just need to be still and be present with them.
I think when you're grieving too, you don't want to ask people for time or help either.
Mhm.
I think that's what keeps people
Yeah.
separated too.
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Well, because I think when you're grieving, you can feel like you are the burden.
yes, definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that is really important to remember, like as someone who wants to care for the person grieving, is to remember dates. And so like if someone experiences child loss, or,
Mhm.
the just or the loss of a relationship, like maybe they went through a divorce, like to
Mhm.
remember those dates, to write them down,
Hmm.
and then send them a card or a text or just something to let
Yeah.
Hmm.
them know you're thinking about them on that particular day.
Yeah.
And I think that gives them, like, it makes them feel really loved and cared for,
Mhm.
that you even remembered that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's really good, because it can be easy for us who are being the observer of the person processing the grief or the loss. Um, so those dates can kind of fall away for us. But if we mark them down and we are so intentional to go follow back up with them, that's going to speak volumes. I mean, that would be a huge, if somebody did that for a loss I went through,
Hmm.
you know.
This actually, so my husband's cousin,
Mm-hmm.
Um, she passed away a couple years ago, and another family member, it was a few months later, because this was during COVID. But a few months later, she sent everybody in the family, like it was on the exact day, but she sent everybody in the family a seeds to plant something in her honor,
Mm,
which I thought was really
Oh,
cool,
yeah.
and
hmm.
just a good reminder about
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, that is really good. That's it's a sweet way to be able to honor the memory
Yeah.
of what
Hmm.
she's been going, of her. I had a friend who, when they had a family member pass away, somebody gave them a tree, similar thing, where they planted like a sapling, and as it grew, it just reminded them of that person.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
there's all kinds of ways that we can um, support somebody. When I'm also kind of thinking, like, maybe we can talk about some of the ways that we shouldn't, things we shouldn't do, because I think there's things that we do, and sometimes I don't think people do them on purpose. I think they try their
Yeah, I think they're
best.
well-meaning.
They're
Yeah.
well-meaning, right? But there's some things we just shouldn't do.
Hmm.
I think especially one of the things that pops in my mind, especially when you're thinking about the loss of a loved one, do not tell that person that that person who just died can be replaced.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm sorry that your
Hmm.
child, your husband, whoever passed away, but it's okay. They have more husbands out there, or you can have another baby." You know, don't, please. I mean, you might be trying to comfort them, saying that there's, that that there's more in the future. I understand that can be a thing that you're attempting to do, that can come across pretty harshly.
Mhm.
I've been with people who have had that said to them, and
Yeah.
it's not helpful in the moment for sure.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Are there things that you have heard people do or have experienced? I mean, obviously, we want to protect I mean, we don't want to call anybody out. I don't mean that. But like, if there's something that you've seen happen that
Mhm.
you know that's not helpful, what are some things that maybe you guys have seen?
I've just heard people say, "Well, heaven gained another
Mm-hmm.
angel."
Yep.
And,
Yeah.
I know that that did not help the person that
Right.
had a loss at
Yeah.
all, and it's not really
Yeah.
biblical anyway.
Right. Well, and usually,
But,
yeah, because usually that
um
person, like, I really just want them here right now. So
Yeah.
yes.
even if they are with the Lord and we're happy for them for that,
Mhm.
it's still, it kind of takes away their grief. It doesn't allow them to grieve.
Yeah, no,
It minimizes it.
it does,
Mm-hmm.
and just it's kind of a message of, well,
Yeah.
just accept it and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which be better if you just were present, gave him a hug,
Yeah.
and said,
Right.
"I'm so very sorry."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then if you're unsure, probably the best policy is
Mm-hmm.
don't say it. Just
Yeah.
Keep that one
be
to
there for
yourself.
yeah.
Yeah. Keep it. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah.
Uh,
You don't have to
Yeah.
share every thought that you think.
No.
yeah.
So,
No.
yeah.
Oh, I guess I want to be like gentle saying this, but something that one made me think is just the way that I've seen people um, attempt to comfort by
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like over spiritualizing the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Mhm.
really unhelpful, and it can also like it can do so much more harm
Mhm.
when you do that. It's not bad to like pray with the person or read scripture to them, but it also you have to time that well
Mhm.
because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that is the last thing that someone needs in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
for you to recite scripture to them after a loss,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's true and good. And I know that's really hard sometimes for people to
It
understand,
is.
but it's
Yeah.
just it's
You.
it's scripture is always
Mm.
helpful, but you have to time things well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It has to be the right time and the right moment. I mean, you have to also know if that person's ready.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, I think, maybe it's sending it to them on a card might be better at that, maybe writing them a card and including your thoughts in it. There's ways that we can do it, but it has to be presented well.
Mhm.
Um, I was also thinking as we were as you were listening to you talk, both of you speak, is one of the things I think that often happens when there's a loss is, and I've seen this happen over and over again, where people will call it people and say, "Hey, what do you need?"
Oh, yeah.
And while that seems like very kind, and I think it's a great thing to do, I don't want to discourage people to ask for what they
Mhm.
need. But what I would encourage people to do is maybe to reframe that, because what happens when a person is going through grief or
Mhm.
loss, they don't know what they need, right? That part of your brain isn't working
Mhm.
properly. They don't know how to process what they need.
Mhm.
Like I mean, if you've ever asked that, if you, because I've done that in the past, so I know it's something
Oh,
people
yeah,
do.
so have I.
Yeah.
But what happens when you're in that space is you will hear somebody say, "I don't know what I need," because they don't.
Mhm.
So what I would suggest instead is you go to them with the things that you're willing to do. I've
Mhm.
noticed they haven't been able, I've noticed that, maybe they lost their husband or maybe they lost one of their kids. And maybe the things that person used to do. Like,
Mhm.
so maybe if it was their husband, maybe they were the one that took care of the lawn. Or maybe it was their wife
Mhm.
and they were the ones who did all the laundry. I don't know, whatever. And you know what those tasks are. And you go, "Hey, can I come over to your house on Thursday? I'd love to come into your laundry for you." And at first you're gonna be like, "No, what, wait a minute." Like,
Mhm.
"No, I know that I want to give this to you. Can I do this for you? Or can I come
Mhm.
over and mow your lawn for you?"
Mhm.
Whatever task would take something off the plate, be really specific what it is
Mhm.
instead of making it general. Or maybe they haven't been to the grocery store for a while. "Can I go to the grocery store and I'm gonna go pick up some things for you?" Don't
Mhm.
ask them to make a list either because it's gonna be too much.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
just go and get the things or prepare the food. Don't ask them what they want to eat.
Yeah,
Make the
just bring
food.
him something.
Yeah.
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 because
Yeah.
they
Mhm.
can't make the decisions right now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Their energy is going to grieving and healing.
Yes, this couple even had, it's not necessarily a loss, but it is unexpected. Their twins were in the NICU,
Mhm.
born really early, and my friend who had also gone through that,
Mhm.
she was saying the same thing. And people mean well when they say,
Yep.
Just I'm here. Let me know what you
Right.
want me to do." But and that's what she was saying. When you're in that, like, you just are in survival mode. You don't know
Right.
what to tell people. You
You don't.
appreciate them reaching out, but and so that's one of the things
Mhm.
that she said was one of the best is just when somebody does something,
Yep.
maybe they don't pick the right exact thing that you love
That's
or
right.
bring you the right brand of something, but you
Yep.
appreciate it in the
You
moment.
do.
And yeah, I remember a story too of I didn't know them personally, but I had heard about the father was killed in an automobile accident,
Mhm.
and he had a 10-year-old son or something. It was always their thing to go get their hair cut at this barber. And I was like,
Mhm.
their
Yeah.
group, their small group, I think, their friends, the dads would take him like each month to the barber
Mhm.
to stand in the his dad's
Yeah.
place,
Yeah.
and that was such a big deal to the
It is.
mothers.
Yeah.
Like that's just something I cannot fill as
Mhm.
the man in his life. And so all those dads stepped up and
That's pretty
and took him to
amazing.
the yeah, which was a really special event for him and his dad. So I
Yeah.
just thought, gosh, that's really serving someone
That
well
is. That's
through
yeah.
grief that you
Right.
can't,
Because
you can't
that's
measure.
that gives a great
Yeah.
picture too of
Hmm.
that grief isn't just temporary. It's not just a short-lived thing, because that's something
Mhm.
that's gonna go on for a long time, but to have those people to
Right.
continue to step into that space,
Hmm.
is have a way for those people to continue to step in that space over a long period of
Yeah.
time is amazing.
Yeah.
And that allows that healing to go so much quicker often,
Hmm.
and it can allow that person to see that grief experience a lot differently that's walking it out.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
Well, that's pretty great.
Yeah.
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 That's a sweet,
I
sweet story.
it is. It is a sweet story.
Hmm.
I mean, because there are so many times when we're walking through grief that we hear you know, it can be so hard, but when those moments come along when somebody's like, "I will
Hmm.
walk this out with you," it just it's what's the phrase of we're being like Christ with like Jesus with skin on. I think is the
Yes.
you
Oh.
guys ever heard that before?
Uh-uh.
Yeah, being Jesus
Yeah,
with
I've
skin
heard
on.
that.
So we're
Yeah.
being Christ for others,
Hmm.
but we don't need to actually have the exact right things. It's just like just find how you
Hmm.
can fill the gap. How can you stand in the gap for that person?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So there can also be, as we're kind of thinking through loss, there can be a purpose in our loss, right? And so I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but when we think about purpose of loss, we can sometimes go, there is no good thing that could come out of this. Um, when you guys think of a purpose, have you ever thought about purpose coming out of loss?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, I don't think about it during the loss.
No, no, no. It's usually reflective, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't think it would be that helpful. Well, I guess that's not necessarily true. So for me, one loss I haven't said, but I experienced was like the like loss of like innocence in my
Mhm.
childhood. And
Mhm.
I remember when I was like walking that out as a teenager, um that was something that the Lord reminded me over and over, was that there was purpose in this pain. Like it wasn't good and it wasn't something that like he caused or wanted to happen, but
Mhm.
um he actually, like, one of the scriptures that I've like I feel like is like written on my heart for a long time is Genesis 50:20. And it says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, for
Hmm.
what is now being done, the saving of many lives." And I don't know, I think about that like in relation to my job here,
Yes, definitely. Hmm.
and that he is using it for good. And sorry, but like there is purpose in that pain. And um
Absolutely.
it's okay. Like,
Totally.
it's not okay that that happened, but
No,
it's okay, like,
He works
he's
all things for good.
yeah.
he redeems it through
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's
helping
the word I
That's
was
others.
looking
right.
for.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's really good though, because he does. There is purpose in our pain, like you're saying, Taylor. Because I think sometimes when we're in that lot, that when we're going through the healing portion or in the throes of the loss, it can be like, what good's going to come from this? What good?
Mm-hmm.
But there is so much that can come out of it. It's learning to trust the Lord through that. For those of us who are believers, for those of us who aren't believers, it can draw us into something new. It could help us to go deeper in so many ways that we couldn't have gone before. I think about what you were sharing too. It builds compassion in ways that you
It
haven't had
does.
compassion
Mm-hmm.
before. Because I after listening to all of us talk today, I think, man, if we wouldn't have had these experiences that we've mentioned, and I think we've just scratched the surface on our experiences, right?
Yes.
If we haven't had if we hadn't had those, we wouldn't have the compassion we have. Laura wouldn't be this bright and smiling face I see on Sunday where she connects with everybody in the way that she can, in the way that you can go deep really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
really authentically.
Well, thanks, Anne.
Yeah. And Taylor wouldn't be this person where she can sit in these really hard spaces that you just wouldn't be able to do those things without
Mm-hmm.
experiencing the losses that you've been through. And that's how God refines us. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
beauty of our stories together. And I think when we let God do those things, there's something amazing that can come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when we have to trust Him to walk those things out. And I don't know, it's just amazing what He can do when we sit in that space. And when I think about loss, that's what I think of is just what He can do through it.
Mm-hmm.
What can come on the other side of the loss and the grief.
I think it's important to help people too, since you do have compassion in different areas for certain
Mhm.
types of loss, is just let them know that there is help on the other side. There's hope,
Yeah, there is hope.
and that you don't have to. This is not going to be a lifelong thing. I mean, yes, I feel like grief comes up, especially for the really really hard
Mhm.
relational losses. I mean, I've heard
Yeah.
people say, thankfully, I haven't had so far a deep, deep, close personal loss.
Mm.
But the ones that I know that have, I've walked alongside them as best I can.
Mhm.
They just need to be reminded that
Yeah.
um, there's hope, and
Yeah.
then it gets less.
Yeah.
That's what they've said. It still comes up every now and
Yeah.
then, but it's less, and then
Yeah.
they can start helping others. And
Yeah. I was just
yeah.
talking to a friend earlier today, before we started the podcast, and we were talking about um, a loss. She's going through a loss, and there's a loss that I'm going through, and we were talking about um, often the resistance of people walking through that with you, or that they're walking through their own, but the necessity, the necessity of walking through that, because when we walk through the hard is when we get to grow.
Hmm.
If we don't walk through the hard, we miss the growth.
Hmm. And then you
And
really are stuck in the pain, and
yeah,
it's hard to get out of it.
it is. And so it's
Yeah.
so important. So when we think about practical ways or things that we can do to process through or help us through our
Hmm.
grief or loss, do either of you have tools or things that's worked for you that have been helpful when you were processing through your own?
I journaled a lot.
Okay.
I journal a ton too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have,
Hmm.
like, just notebooks full
Yeah.
of that time. Like, it has prayers, it has my thoughts, it has
Mm-hmm.
just or it literally just has kind of I recapped the day or something, but it
Yeah.
just helped to
Hmm.
process through all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone back in some of my journals recently and just remembered each, you read the page and you're brought back to the emotions of that time, but then you see how far you have grown, or how you've dealt with the pain, or how God's brought you to
Mm-hmm.
a completely new place you did not imagine. And
Yeah.
so, but it's good emotionally, I feel like, to get that out
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
on paper feel like we all process things as
Mhm.
humans well when we just write it down. I
Yeah.
don't know. There's something to it.
There's something, yeah.
Yeah.
Such a good tool. Yeah, I
Hmm.
love the idea of journaling and doing that process. It does bring things out, at least when I'm writing, there's things that come out of me that wouldn't come out normally. And so there's a power to that.
Or that you're afraid to say out loud, but
Yeah.
you can write
Oh,
down.
yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's true. Like we don't have to filter ourselves,
Yeah.
Hmm.
because you also don't have to save your journal. I mean, if you need to be really raw and you don't want anybody to see it, you can throw it away, burn it, shred it, whatever. You don't have
Yeah.
to
Well, and
keep
as
it.
I back to my miscarriage, as I was processing that
Mm.
through my journaling, the Holy Spirit really gave me a beautiful little poem about
Mm.
the babies that I lost and how they entered into
Oh,
God's presence, without having to go through the hardship of this
yeah.
world. And it was just a interesting way to think about it. And it gave
Mhm.
me comfort. And then I had a friend who went through a miscarriage, not expecting it. And it, like you said, there's a stigma to it that's not a big loss. Like,
Right.
get over it. I
Mhm.
mean, really, you do feel that from people around you.
Mhm.
Even at the time, I don't know that my husband knew how to process it as a
Right.
man,
Right.
so he would, I just don't know that he knew either.
Mhm.
So he was kind of distant about the whole thing. So I kind of had to walk that out and realize
Mhm.
that it is deep. And so when my friend was going through that, I got to share the poem with her. And I was just like, okay,
Mm.
Lord, you've redeemed this situation so that I can, and that really ministered to her heart. And so, that was something that was in my journal.
Yeah, that's
That
great.
as I'm writing just kind of gave me this poem. So yeah,
Mhm.
I've shared it with a couple of friends that have gone
That's
through
so
that now.
good.
So yeah, that
Yeah,
was really
that's so
neat,
good.
neat story that God gave me. So
Well, I think as you kind of also alluded to the another thing that we can do when we're grieving is or going through a loss is finding that community to
mm-hmm,
connect with.
mm-hmm,
Because if we don't have community to connect with, sometimes it makes it more challenging. And so reach out for help. If you don't have a friend group that you can reach out to, we're here at Peace Restored. People can reach out to us here. We're
mm-hmm,
always here to connect and help. Or if you have a local church group, you can connect with them. I mean,
mm-hmm.
or a friend, just find somebody to talk to.
Yeah, I feel like that's really, really important. But there's
Mm-hmm.
also stigma to that. I know
Mm-hmm.
some people that were very resistant to just going to talk to a counselor
Yep.
or go, go sit down
Yeah.
with somebody. I think it's a pride issue, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, but I know in the
Yeah.
past it's been very helpful. And
Yeah.
obviously you guys do. That's
Yeah.
what you do
That's
here.
what we do. Yeah. We're kind of
But
partial to
some people
counselors.
are just
No, they're not.
resistant to
They
that. Like
are.
it's, like you losing your house. It's
Mm-hmm.
looked down upon
Yep.
sometimes by certain people, I feel like. And
Yeah.
it's hard convincing them that they need to go.
Yep.
Um, but that's
That's okay.
definitely super helpful.
Yeah. Well, that's what
Everyone
we
should do
hope
it.
to make it. We hope if people come here, they at least feel that it's warm and inviting, and we try to
Hmm.
make it as painless as possible, to kind of walk through that process.
Hmm.
But please, we just want people to find that right group of people to talk to. If it's not us, find somebody to talk to.
Hmm. There's
Because it's
always
important.
somebody who's gone through loss and grief,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but we all do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we kind of close today, if you had a friend sit in front of you today, that is, I know, and you are processing through grief with them, and you wanted to leave them with something of encouragement, what would that be? Yeah.
I feel like I've said a lot of
I
things
know,
of encouragement.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Just
Um,
like one little thing, one little nugget that you'd want to share. It doesn't have to be anything big, just something.
mhm.
I don't know why that feels like such a tough
I
question.
know.
I know.
Just that there's always hope.
I think
Uh,
that's a really good one.
Hope
There's
is
always
Yeah.
hope.
huge.
Yeah.
And it will pass, they say, this too shall pass, but
Hmm.
in the moment, it
It
just
doesn't
feels
feel
so
like it.
big and
Mm,
overwhelming.
yeah.
Sometimes it's just good for somebody to tell you something practical. I
Yeah.
feel,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that to be true, but sometimes
Hmm.
when somebody says it, um, just a simple prayer over
Yeah.
someone can really, you might think it's a silly
Hmm.
prayer or it's simple, but I think a little prayer for someone is like a warm blanket. That's how I
Yeah.
feel prayer sometimes. That
Oh,
when,
that's
when
really
you're going
good.
through something hard, it's like a
Yeah.
warm, no matter what they say, I feel like it's just that they took the time
Mm,
that they're doing it right there. You
yeah.
can hear their words and God uses it
Hmm.
to minister.
Yeah.
to that person's heart. So,
That's good.
Just thinking as you were talking, because it will pass, and there is always hope. That's a really good one. But just as that it will pass, that your timeline is not the same as
Mm.
someone else's, and however long it takes you is
Oh, it's
okay.
okay. Yeah, that's
mhm,
really good
mhm,
because I think people do put expectations on others, like you should be over this, or you've had however long, like you should be at this point by now, and it's okay if your
mhm,
journey looks different than somebody else's
mhm,
journey.
Yeah.
I love both of those, hope and expectations. It's okay. We're going to get through this. And I just kept thinking as we were talking, as um, I think my thing I just want to say to that person is, I'll be here for you. I'm here with you in it.
mhm.
Um, and I think that's, just letting them know I'm
Nice. It's
present with
huge. Yeah.
them
Yeah.
Mhm.
for as long as they need.